Episode of Physiology Hub. Today we're going to be discussing the principle of rate coding. Now, in order to understand rate coding, we need to understand two fundamental features of the action potential. First, the action potential is an all or nothing phenomena. It either happens or it does not happen. Now, the second fundamental feature is once we reach excitation threshold and we initiate an action potential, the resulting size or magnitude of the action potential does not change. So if we look at a single action potential, we cannot actually derive any useful information about stimulus strength. And this is why in our body, we code for stimulus strength in the rate of firing of action potentials. Let's have a closer look at this process. Now, in order to initiate an action potential, we need to get some sort of initial depolarization or initial excitation from another cell, causing us to depolarize our membrane potential to negative 55 millivolts. This is our excitation threshold. It is at this stage that the M gate of our voltage-gated sodium channels opens, allowing sodium to flow into the cell, causing that depolarization. Now, as this is occurring, we get closing of our H gate or our inactivation gate, stopping sodium from flowing into the cell, and we get opening of our voltage-gated potassium channels. And because we have lots of potassium inside the cell, potassium goes with its concentration gradient outside of the cell, causing this repolarization. Now, up until this point, we have something known as the absolute refractory period. Another action potential cannot fire during this stage, and this allows the action potential to travel in a single direction, and that is namely down the axon. Now, after this phase, we enter something known as the relative refractory period. Now, it is at this stage we're able to fire another action potential, but as you can see, we have still a permeability to potassium. Potassium is still flowing out of the cell, and because our membrane potential is now hyperpolarized, we need a stronger stimulus in order to bring us back to excitation threshold. And it is at this phase that we can derive some useful information about the stimulus strength. If the stimulus is strong enough to overcome the hyperpolarization phase, that is a strong stimulus. Now, if you think about this, how our brain then makes sense of this information, our brain simply needs to look at the frequency of the action potential from selective receptors, and we can then derive useful information about stimulus strength. An increase in firing of action potentials means we overcome the hyperpolarization phase, meaning it is a strong stimulus. If there is a decreased rate in firing of action potential from our receptors, we have a decrease in stimulus strength. Now let's look at a conceptual example to fully make sense of this process. Now this section here is known as the baroreceptor reflex. We're going to go through a lot more detail about what this entails in a future video. But for now, I want you to think about that rate coding principle. Baroreceptors are specialized receptors that we find in our aortic arch and our carotid sinus. And what they detect is stretch on the vessel wall. Now, I want you to think about when you are lying down for a prolonged period of time and you stand up suddenly. You get that head rush. And that is actually because of a decrease in your blood pressure. When your blood pressure decreases, we get a decreased stretch on our vessel walls of our arteries. This means because we have specialized receptors that code for stretch, they decrease their rate in firing, meaning the stimulus is no longer strong enough to overcome that hyperpolarization phase, meaning our rate of firing of action potentials decreases. And this is the fundamental feature of rate coding. Our brain makes sense of the stimulus strength by looking at the frequency of our action potential. Now, if you guys have any questions about this video, please email me at hubphysiology@gmail.com. But for now, I want you to think about the rate coding principle in the coding of the frequency of action